Hello, Year 8. Welcome to your history lesson, your final lesson of the day. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but I have recorded this for you to complete the work. So, your title is, Why Did the Berlin Wall Fall in 1989? The wall has existed for 28 years at this point, and in 1989, almost out of nowhere, the wall finally is broken down and people start mixing together again. David Hasselhoff is the man in this picture, and you can see he's in Berlin. I want you just to think about why is he there on New Year's Eve 1989 singing a song called Looking for Freedom. So why is he there? Number two, how will the crowd react to Hasselhoff, and why will they react in that way, do you think? It's actually not quite what you imagine. So pause the video here, make sure you've got your title and date, the 27th of November, and answer the two questions on the board. Okay, so just to tell you about this, if you hadn't seen the video, I didn't ask for it to be played. I'm just going to explain what happened. He is basically on top of a crane, and he is singing his song. There are people on the eastern side of Germany to his left, and people on the western side here on the right, and they are all chanting, singing along. They are having a party because it's New Year's Eve, and they are very, very happy. Indeed, they are mixing together at last. Some people, however, threw bottles at him, and in this video, you actually see one of them fly past his head. So not everybody was happy about this arrangement, but the majority were happy. So we're going to look at 4 reasons why this happened. The first one, I want you to write down this subtitle, Gorbachev, okay? The man in the picture there is Mikhail Gorbachev. So write down number 1, Gorbachev. Okay, and here is what we need to know about him. In 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev took over the power, the reins of power in Russia. Before him, Russian leaders had been quite steadfast in their communist beliefs. They had been adamant that there would be no mixing with the West. And you can see on the map, all the red countries are the communist countries that were controlled by Russia. However, Gorbachev used a much more relaxed approach. You see, Russia and the countries it controlled in red were losing money, and they were losing power. So he made some changes, and this is what I'm going to get you to note in a moment. First of all, he decided to introduce perestroika, which means restructuring. This is where the government wouldn't have as much control over companies, and companies would now start to naturally improve, which would help the economy. Remember, Russia had a policy where the government controlled everything beforehand as part of the communist ideas. But now Gorbachev realized businesses needed to be free to do what they wanted to a certain extent. So perestroika was introduced. The second thing he introduced was glasnost. This means openness. He believed that people needed to discuss new ideas freely without worrying about government control or punishment. And that would also help the government economy to improve. And this led to the USA becoming friendlier, okay, to Gorbachev. It also led to the UK becoming friendlier with Gorbachev. Can you write down these 2 ideas, restructuring and openness, perestroika and glasnost, and summarize what they mean? So that's the first part. Gorbachev sets off these ideas about restructuring and being open, basically destroying the communist ideas that had been in charge for most of the 20th century. Number 2 is Hungary. So can you write down, please, number 2, Hungary, as a subtitle. In April 1989, the Hungarian government, which you can see in the middle of the map, one of the red countries at the border with the West, the Hungarian government ordered the electricity in the barbed wire border fence along the Hungary-Austria border to be turned off. Remember, the whole of Europe was separated by this long electrified fence. It wasn't just Berlin. The whole of Europe was cut in half by this border fence. But Hungary created a hole. And when they turned the electricity off, Western TV crews came to the border to see what would happen. Border guards began removing sections of the fence, opening it up for the first time in 28 years, more than 28 years, in fact. The open border infuriated East German officials who feared a return to the days before the Berlin Wall, when thousands of East Germans fled daily to West Berlin. And they were right to be scared. Their country could collapse if people basically ran away to the West and made the West more powerful because of that. So can you summarize what happened in Hungary and why and what the impact was on the East Germans? Number 3, can you write down protests? Okay, the heart of our topic this term, protests. And here is what happened. The pictures give you some idea. Thousands of East Germans travelled to Hungary to cross the border into Austria and eventually into the West. They wanted to escape communism and the Soviet Union. The East German government began to realise they couldn't stop people leaving. It was impossible. Protests grew in East Germany. Thousands of people turned out to peacefully protest. Eventually, at least 1 million people were protesting by marching peacefully through the street. And that is the picture you can see in the top right corner. Okay. People weren't now just protesting to have the wall torn down. They were actively protesting against the government, something that nobody had done for decades. David Hasselhoff's song that I mentioned at the very beginning, Looking for Freedom, was #1 in West German charts for 8 weeks. That means for 8 weeks, people in West Germany were listening to this song, Looking for Freedom, more than any other song. And that showed support and solidarity with the East Germans. Please can the teacher just rewind the video and allow the students to summarise the protests and the impact that they had, please. Okay. Number 4 is miscommunication. This is the 4th reason that the Berlin Wall fell. Can you write down number 4, miscommunication? By November 1989, the communist leader in East Germany was desperate to stop the exodus to West Germany. He was desperate to stop the mass fleeing of people to West Germany, exodus. He called a press conference in early November. So remember, in April, the border had been opened up, and now it is November, and thousands, if not millions of people have left. During the press conference, the pressurized situation led this leader to become confused about the new laws to control people leaving. And instead, he announced that people were free to move between East and West permanently. This law, he said, would take effect immediately. So essentially, he said, the wall doesn't matter anymore. The border guards don't matter anymore. People are free to move between East and West permanently from now on. And it was a complete accident. The fall of the Berlin Wall had truly begun by accident. Can you pause the video here and just summarize the miscommunication that happens? Okay, and this miscommunication is televised and it is broadcast on the radio. So it's instant news. Everybody knows about it instantly. The guards at the wall, however, didn't know what to do because obviously they weren't expecting orders to let people go freely. There were thousands of angry East Germans at the wall by this point, and they had heard the press release stating that the borders were open. Eventually, they decided to open the border gates despite having no official authority to do so. So the soldiers just let people do what they wanted. Everyone poured through the wall and began a party. Okay, people began to demolish the wall that very night. They brought their sledgehammers, pickaxes, they brought diggers, they brought anything they had to destroy this wall, this symbol of oppression. You just add to your number 4 the impact that the miscommunication had. Thousands of people coming to the wall and demolishing it. And this is the impact. You can see on the maps, pre-1989, Russia had controlled a huge amount of Eastern Europe, and that was all communist. However, by 1991, Russia had relinquished control of all of those countries, and they had become independent from Russia. And communism itself had disappeared. Over the next 4 months, the rest of the border was gradually opened. Within the first 4 days, a quarter of East Germany's population went to West Germany. Cars waited for 11 hours in places to cross the border. They could still get money from West Germany when they arrived, 100 Deutschmarks each. That was something the West did to enable refugees to live their lives successfully, but also to entice people to come over. They often spent it on bananas, this money, because they were highly prized and a rarity in Eastern Germany. Remember, the communist bloc, the communist countries, did not use Western goods, okay? And bananas very rarely came through the border because they were grown not in communist-controlled countries, but in tropical countries far across the world. Supermarkets sold out of bananas in East Germany close to the border. And eventually, the border was completely abandoned. In 1990, Germany was reunited. Communism also ended in Eastern Europe and Russia, but the fall of the Berlin Wall began that process properly. Today, East Germany is still much poorer than West Germany. In the city of Berlin, there is a gold line across the city which indicates where the wall used to be. There are also sections of the wall still left standing as a monument to what had happened, to remind us of the people who died, and to remind us to never let that sort of thing happen again. Can you please pause the video here and write down 4 impacts of the fall of the Berlin Wall? Finally, your question. What was the most significant reason why the Berlin Wall fell in 1989? A tricky question. You've got 4 choices. Was it Gorbachev? Was it miscommunication? Was it the protests? Or was it Hungary and opening the border there? I want you to explain each of those reasons and then tell me what you think was the most important at the end of your answer. Okay? So just explain each of those reasons, and at the end of your answer, tell me which one you think was most important for the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's it, boys. Thank you very much. Have a really good weekend, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.